Hey yo, what's good? Hey, it's me, so welcome to the video. Today, I would like to talk to you about this Sky Striker deck that you can build in the space of 24 hours. I know that because this account that you're looking at is less than 24 hours old. Now, I'm going to showcase to you the deck, some of its mechanics, some of its core combos, and just some interesting things that you can learn even if you already know how to play Sky Strikers. But before that, I'm going to show you how to create a brand new Steam account. That way you can have a brand new save file of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel with all of the gems and resources and freedom to allow you to build this deck in 24 hours. It's a completely free process, so hold on 1 second. We're gonna play that, and then there's going to be a time code in the description in case you don't need information on how to create a new account, or you've already built this deck and you just want some information on how to play it. To create a new account for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, there's 3 core things that you're going to need: a new email address, a new Steam account, and a new Konami ID. Now, head over to Gmail or any other third-party platform that allows you to create multiple email accounts and, well, create a new account. This is the most straightforward step. I tend to use Gmail because it's quick, easy, and seamless. Some other options are Yahoo and Proton Mail. Once that's done, you'll need to log out of your existing Steam account and create a new one. Make sure that you know the login details for your existing Steam account so that you do not lock yourself out of your existing account. Once that's done, you can implement the details from the email account that we just created in order to make yourself a brand new Steam account. They'll ask you to verify your email, and once that's done, boom, new Steam account created. Open up Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel on the brand new Steam account that you created and begin the game. Now, a few things will have to happen here. You don't have to reinstall the game, but you will need to re-download the game's data. You'll be asked to read the privacy policies and taken through the tutorial, which you can then skip, after which point you'll be asked to download the full game data. The starter deck that you choose and the name that you put in do not matter because the name can be changed later on, and well, the starter deck isn't what we're here for. Once the download is done, you go to the sub menu from the main menu and click on data transfer settings. You'll see a link there that asks you to link your Konami ID to this game account. Once you're at the website where the link takes you to, you can now create a brand new Konami ID using the email that we created at the start of the process. You'll be asked to verify your email address, and once that's done, your account will be officially linked to this Konami ID, which has now been created. It's a completely free process, and you can start playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel on this new account without any fear of losing your progress. There's a few important things to note. The very first is when switching between Steam accounts, say you want to go back to your original account, you will not have to re-download the game data every single time. Once the accounts that you're switching between have gone past the tutorial, the point at which all of the game data is downloaded, you don't have to reinstall the entire game every time. You just seamlessly log out and log back in so long as you've gotten past the tutorial stage. The second thing that's very important is this game does have a Steam lock feature. Once a Konami ID has been linked to a Steam account, it cannot be unlinked, and you cannot log into that Konami ID on a different Steam account. Now, unlike Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, where you can log out of your existing account, but you will never be able to log in on another Steam device, this game does not let you Steam lock yourself. It will prevent you from logging out or putting another game's data onto your Steam account, so there's no need to worry about that. I hope you found the guide useful. If you did, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe on the video. Stay tuned for the deck profile. Now, do not worry if you don't know the names of these cards or if you feel like you won't remember them. The names will be either in the description or in the pinned comment, so check there. This, in my opinion, is a going second deck. Some people have builds that prefer going first, but second is my preference because it allows me to see what my opponent has set up and play through their board. Now, one of the main starting cards and combo pieces in this deck is Sky Striker Ace Ray. She has a quick effect that lets you tribute her to special summon a different Sky Striker Ace Link monster into your extra monster zone. Now, you may be thinking, well, if I've normal summoned this card, I can just link summon one of the Link monsters since all of them are Link 1. We're going to get into how useful that quick effect is later in the video. While this card is in your graveyard, if a face-up Sky Striker Ace Link monster is destroyed by battle or leaves the field in any way based on your opponent's card effect, you can summon this card from the graveyard. Now, already your mind might be turning to realize, hey, if my opponent removes one of my other cards and I summon this card onto the field, I can use its quick effect to go into a different Link monster on my opponent's turn, but we're going to get more into that later on. Now, if you've gone first, ideally you want to normal summon Ray, then link one into Shizuku to search your deck for Engage in the end phase. Shizuku's ability allows you to search your deck for any card effectively in your deck in the end phase and add it to your hand if Shizuku was summoned on this turn. Now, bear in mind that every duel will be different. This is just the bare bones monster combo that you're most likely going to start on, so you can also set whatever back row you have and do whatever setting up that you can with the spells at your disposal in your opening hand. You can fill up your graveyard, you can activate your continuous spells, so on and so forth, but generally speaking, you will end with a Shizuku on the field and a Ray in the graveyard. Going second, in my opinion, is a little bit more interesting. You still do any setup that you can, again, just like usual, but your monster order will be this. You normal summon Ray, then you special summon Hayate from the extra deck. You don't use Ray's effect to do this. You link one into Ray. Attack directly with Hayate because Hayate says it can attack your opponent directly, and then after it's done battle, it doesn't matter what kind of damage is done. After Hayate does battle, you get to send any necessary combo piece, one of your monsters, one of your spells from your deck into the graveyard. Then after that's done, you go into your main phase 2. This deck very much appreciates main phase 2 and you will almost always be using it. You link one Hayate into Shizuku. That way when you end your turn, you get to search your deck. That means you sent a card from the deck to the graveyard, and then you're adding a card from your deck to your hand in the end phase. Now, like I said, every duel is going to be different based on what your opponent is playing and what you've opened, but that is the standard base combo that you would like to see when playing this deck. There are alternative routes that you can take to get relatively the same effect, but that is one of the most optimal openings you can do. But like I said, certain factors can change that. The Engage spell card lets you search out your deck for basically the entire archetype, and if you've opened this card on turn 1, you can activate its effect to search out the deck, and then, instead of making Hayate and going into your battle phase, you can make Kagari, the boss monster of the deck, which will allow you on summon to add a card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, none of the spell cards are once per turn, meaning that you search out your deck using Engage, you add Engage back to your hand, and then you can search all over again. After that, you can make either Hayate or Shizuku, depending on if you've gone first or second, and continue your turn normally from there. Now, if you opened a multi-roll, it won't necessarily change your opening combo, but it may affect what cards you send to the graveyard with Hayate and what you search with Shizuku. Effectively, what multi-roll does is, in the end phase, depending on how many cards you activated this turn with the name Sky Striker, your spell cards, you get to get cards out of your graveyard and set them to your field. Now, this is interesting because Shizuku cannot search your deck for any card that is in your graveyard. But using this card, you can send a card to the graveyard with Hayate, then activate this in the end phase because it always activates before Shizuku to set the card that you sent with Hayate, and then you can search that same card out using Shizuku if you want to. Another cool thing that you might do is send your quick play negate to the graveyard using Hayate's effect, and then use your multi-roll to set it on the field in the end phase. So multi-roll changes what you're looking for, not the combo itself. Now, there's so much I could talk about when it comes to your opening play and the different variables that might come into account, but once you start playing the deck and you get a feel for it, it becomes relatively straightforward. An important thing to note though is that if you're going second and your opponent has back row set, do not set your multi-roll in the same column as their back row, because if it's an infinite impermanence, it will negate your multi-roll. Now that you've got the basics down, we're going to go into more specific and advanced combos and plays that you can do with the deck, and I'll explain some of the ratios and cards and why they're there. First up, we can talk about Kagari, the so-called boss monster of the deck. Now, like I said, when you summon her, you get something out of the graveyard that you've already sent there, which means that unlike most boss monsters, you shouldn't be too eager to get her out because you can only play one in your deck. You use Pot of Avarice, so that one copy can be sent back into the deck, recycled so you can use it again, but you should play her a bit carefully if you can. I tend not to use her at the start of the game unless I've got an Engage in my hand that I'm going to recycle. The reason why I say she's the so-called boss monster is because generally speaking, the boss monster is the go-to card, you know, the ace, the one that you want to put in there. But she's a bit more unique. You have to think a little bit more about her usage and where she applies. And what helps is that none of the spell cards in this deck are once per turn. So if there's anything that you need to play through, maybe some back row, some monsters on the field, and you need multiple uses of your spell cards, she's the go-to. I mentioned Pot of Avarice and we're running it at 3 copies. Let's talk about that. It's a very important card in the deck, in my personal opinion. And while some people might think that it's bricky at 3 copies, in my personal experience, it's been absolutely phenomenal. Now, it's got quite a few uses. Obviously, you target 5 monsters in your graveyard, shuffle them back into the deck, and then draw 2 cards. Like I said, this helps you to recycle your monsters because you're link climbing. You're going to get monsters in the graveyard relatively easily, but on top of that, it can recycle all of the hand traps that are featured at the top of the deck list. That's very, very important, and that's why we don't use impermanence in this deck. We use Effect Veiler instead, because, you know, it just fits better with this card. It has a lot of good synergy. There are other reasons why we use Veiler, but we'll get to those later. Now, one important thing to note when using this card to recycle your resources is that you should try and leave 1 copy of Ray in the graveyard to use, you know, its effect. It's your protection, because when a monster gets removed, it floats onto the field. It's very important to have 1 copy of Ray in your graveyard whenever you can. That being said, Ray is only once per turn, so having multiple copies of her in the graveyard isn't always useful. So if you have 2 to 3 copies, you can send 1 back, and this helps you to recycle them, making your field spell live once again. We'll get to how the field spell works works with Ray in just a moment. The moment is here, okay? So this is how it works. Now, if this field spell is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you are able to special summon one Sky Striker Ace monster from your deck. So if you sent all of your Rays and all of your Roses to the graveyard, this card won't give you an effect to proc once it's also sent to the graveyard, and there's a really good combo that you can do with this card and your continuous spell. You want to keep one Ray in the deck at all times and one Ray in the graveyard. Now, one thing that I wanted to mention is that this deck link climbs a lot. A lot of your monsters are link 1 monsters, and so just having a monster on the field is enough to get one in the graveyard, and you can shuffle and shuffle and shuffle them into the graveyard to fill your graveyard up in order to make this card live. I personally don't see that as being an optimal way to play. I do that as a last resort. If my back is against the wall and I need to draw 2, I will link climb unnecessarily just to fill up my graveyard with link 1 monsters that I can shuffle back into the deck to proc this card. Now, I don't recommend this unless you have to. If I open this card, I won't go out of my way to make it live by climbing for no reason, right? I'll just do my standard combo, and quite frankly, if it gets me there, it gets me there, and there's a good chance that it does, because you're gonna be using these cards anyway. Like, it's gonna happen. There's no need to force it. After you've done that, after you've link climbed for no reason, all of your monsters can only be summoned once per turn. A lot of them have that restriction. So if you've summoned all of them, and just to activate this card, you're kind of stuck in that situation. So in some instances, go out of your way to do it just if your back is up against a wall, but I would say that's not something that you should be doing every single duel. Monster Reborn exists in this deck exclusively as a graveyard fodder because most of the spell cards gain additional effects when you have at least 3 spell cards in the graveyard. That's why this deck is so spell card heavy. Now, I can activate Monster Reborn and get one of my monsters back, or be petty and get one of my opponent's monsters to either link climb with or attack with and go from there. Let's talk about multi-roll. It's one of the most important cards in the deck. Once per turn, you can target one other card you control and send it to the graveyard. Also, your opponent cannot activate effects or cards in response to your spell cards for the rest of this turn, right? So they can't flip their cards up in response. They can't activate their monster effects when you use your spell cards. Now, once per turn during the end phase, set Sky Striker spells with different names from your graveyard up to the number of Sky Striker spell cards that you activated while this card was face up on the field, but banish them when they leave the field. That's important. Remember that, because your cards will be banishing themselves after you use multi-roll to fish them out of the graveyard. Now, it goes without saying, if you've opened multi-roll, it is the first spell that you should be activating, but it is not the first thing that you should be doing. The reason being, well, Ray is a beautiful, beautiful card. We talked about its quick effect to jump off of the field to go into a link summon. Well, imagine a situation where you normal summon Ray and your opponent activates Max C. Well, you use Ray's quick effect to chain and to go into the last card of your combo to search your deck in the end phase. But if you start your turn by activating multi-roll, your opponent knows you're playing Sky Strikers, they know that you're going to be link climbing, they activate Max C, and you can't chain Ray because she's not on the field. So, I personally tend to summon Ray first, then go for my first link summon before I activate multi-roll to protect myself from cards like Max C. Now, I briefly mentioned the combo between multi-roll and your field spell. Your field spell says that you can target one other card you control, excavate the top 3 cards of your deck, and if you excavated any Sky Striker cards, add it to your hand. That's really cool. And then the card on the field that you targeted, you send to the graveyard. Now, what's really, really important here is that if this card in the field zone is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, special summon one Sky Striker Ace monster from the deck. So what you would do with this card is you activate its effect, search out your deck, that's all good and fine. Then, using the effect of multi-roll to send one card on the field to the graveyard, you can send that card to the graveyard and special summon a Ray from your deck to be able to go into your link climb. Not only that, but at that point, the field spell will count as an extra card in your graveyard to allow the activation of your spell cards, which is really, really nice. It just kind of helps to guarantee the consistency of the deck. Another great thing about multi-roll is that it does not specify what kind of card you control that you can send to the graveyard. It says you can target one other card you control, send it to the graveyard. So if you've used Monster Reborn to yoink your opponent's monster, if you've got monsters on your field and your board is clogged up so you can't activate your spell cards, well, this card will allow you to send anything on your field to the graveyard, free up your monster zones to then be able to play your deck properly. It goes without saying that this deck is very specific and has to be piloted in a very specific way. Most of the spell cards only proc. They will only activate for you if you've got no monsters in your monster zone and you've only got a monster in the link zone. So generally speaking, you're going to be ending your turn with one link monster on the field, nothing else there. Your monster zone is completely empty and a Ray in the graveyard, and that's how you go through with things. That may seem scary, but that's what all of the hand traps are for. They help. These are your negates. These the Ghost Ogre destroys a card that activates an effect, so you don't have to worry about multiple things swinging into you, right? Ash Blossom is Ash Blossom, we don't need to talk about that. Artifact Lancia is great because if you're up against something like Tri Brigade, it can completely shut them down. You are safe, you will feel protected, and you have tons of draw power. One really cool thing that I'd like to note about multi-roll is that it is also activatable on your opponent's turn. If you use a quick play Sky Striker spell, such as your quick play Negate, well, you've activated a Sky Striker card this turn. If you have another card in the graveyard, you can set it onto your field. The same thing also applies to Shizuku, by the way. If you use Ray to get Shizuku out on your opponent's turn, assuming that Ray is on the field for whatever reason, maybe one of your Link monsters was banished or destroyed, you can get Shizuku on the field and Shizuku will search out your deck in the end phase. On that note, we should talk about Kaina, because to a lot of people, she's just an extra name in the deck to allow you to more comfortably link climb, so you don't have to summon or be in a position where you might need to summon the same monster twice, right? Because each monster can only come out once per turn, so it just makes the link climb a bit easier. But there is something cool that you can do with this card using Ray's effect. So in the situation where I just talked about summoning Shizuku on your opponent's turn to search in the end phase, well, if your opponent has a really big board and they have a bunch of big monsters that they want to swing with, you can use Ray to summon Kaina onto the field. Kaina says, if this card is special summon, target one face-up monster your opponent controls, it cannot attack until the end of your opponent's turn. So it kind of helps to protect you from a big field of monsters. On the subject of the Link monsters, Hayate is amazing, and in a situation where you didn't open Ray, there is something cool that you can do. Now, you can normal summon a Rose or use the spell card that allows you to summon a Sky Striker token, go into Hayate as if you had opened with Ray, and then you swing at your opponent. You can then send a Ray to the graveyard. That way you have your floating and your protection set up. Then in the end phase, you can still make yourself a Shizuku and you just go from there as if nothing was amiss. I told you that the hand traps in this deck were important, and they are. In this deck, we play Crystron Halki Fibrax. Now, Halki Fibrax requires 2 monsters, including a tuner. Well, Effect Veiler is a tuner, Ghost Ogre is a tuner, and Ash Blossom is also a tuner. So we're running 8 tuners in the deck. Am I bad at math? No, 8 tuners in the deck, which is really, really good. But what does the rest of Halki Fibrax's effects say? Well, if this card is Link Summon, you can special summon one level 3 or lower tuner from your hand or deck in defense position, but it can't activate its effects. During your opponent's main phase or battle phase, banish this card you control to special summon a tuner synchro monster. Now, we are not playing a tuner synchro monster, so why at all would that be relevant? Well, Crystron Halki Fibrax is relevant because it helps us to link climb, which is something that this deck does a lot. Now, you take 2 monsters. Let's say you've got, I don't know, you've got a Ghost Ogre in your hand and you've got a Link monster on the field. You can go into Halki Fibrax by normal summoning the monster that was in your hand. Cool, awesome. Then you can activate Crystron Halki Fibrax's effect to search your deck for an Effect Veiler to put on the field. Awesome, you've got a linked 2 and you've got 1 monster on the field. You can then make Selene. Selene requires 2 monsters, including a Spellcaster monster. Well, Effect Veiler just happens to be a Spellcaster tuner monster, so it's great for the entire climb. You summon this card, and then what this card says is if it's a Link summon, place spell counters on it for the number of spells in your graveyard. Now, that is probably in the late game going to be a lot. Now, most of the rest of the effect doesn't matter, but one thing that does is, once per turn during the main phase, as a quick effect, remove 3 spell counters from the field, which you will have on this card, to special summon 1 spellcaster monster from your hand or graveyard in defense position. What's in your graveyard? Effect Veiler. So you have just gotten a Link 3 on the field, and you've gotten 1 monster on the field. You are ready to Link 4 summon into Access Code Talker, one of the best cards in the deck, and its pseudo boss monster in my opinion. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to this card's effect activations. If this card is Link Summon, you can target 1 Link monster that was used as material for the Link Summon. This card gains attack equal to that Link rating, meaning that if you use a Link 3 monster, you've just gained 3,000 attack. So you always either want to use Selene or your Unicorn to make this card, that way you're at 5,300. Banish 1 Link monster from your field or graveyard to destroy 1 card your opponent controls. It is not a once per turn, so that's what you're effectively building up to a lot of the time, because this deck does a little bit of poking with Hayate. You're going back and forth a little bit, but once Access Code Talker hits the field, that's when things really, they get going. You're doing big damage. Now, like I said, Ray is a great card. Its quick effect is very unique, and if you apply it in certain ways, you can just dodge effects. The point of it is to dodge, right? You can dodge a Max C, you can dodge a Mirror Force, you can dodge all sorts of things using Ray's effect to quick play go into a Link monster, and then if that Link monster is destroyed, well, Ray sent herself to the graveyard, so you're good to go. She's your protection. She's your floating, one in the graveyard and one in the deck at all times if you can manage it. The rest of the deck is really straightforward. It's the spell cards, and I feel like if you just read them, you'll get the full picture, so I'm not going to go in depth on how and when to use each and every single one of them. The only thing to note is you gain additional effects when you have at least 3 spell cards in the graveyard, so do whatever you can to get those 3 in the graveyard. If you need to send a card that you might not be using right now to the graveyard using your multi-roll, maybe your opponent doesn't have a face-up monster, so you can send this, your Afterburner, to the graveyard by placing it face down on the field just to have an extra spell card in the graveyard. Do that, right? Don't be afraid to use some of these effects in situations where you don't need them in order to make your better effects live, or the better way to put it is to say, don't be afraid to have them in the graveyard because multi-roll will send them there, but multi-roll can also get them right back out, so don't worry. So that's the deck. Those are the core plays. I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out. This is one of the first deck profiles that I'm doing in Master Duel, and I'd really like to know how well you received it, if you like the way it was done, if you'd like it to be shorter, longer, more details, less details. I'd really like some feedback. So I appreciate you watching this far if you have done, and have a great day. Take care of yourself.